gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 9. Fade into You. Draco. Early May 1999. Hogwarts, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Despite neither of them conducting an interview, the two Slytherin wizards received enthusiastic confirmation fairly quickly from Oxford University of their acceptance. This was a surprise to neither of them. Their fathers, Lucius and Tiberius, like every Malfoy and not before them, had been experts at playing all sides of both the Muggle and magical worlds. They'd poured plenty of pounds sterling and galleons into various educational institutions, private enterprises, and governmental offices over the years. Draco's great-grandfather, Olivier, even had a building at Cambridge named for him. At least in some places, the Malfoy name was still good for something, Draco mused. Most of all, he was pleased to confirm beyond all shadow of a doubt that he'd be attending university alongside Granger. The Incubus research project was going better than even he could have imagined. Granger had actually agreed to work on it with him periodically, and Draco wasted no opportunity to get the two of them alone. True, much of this alone time for the two of them was unbearably tedious, as Granger insisted that they work in the Hogwarts library. After a few weeks of this, Draco got around this difficulty by waiting to propose that they work on the project until after the library had closed for the night. As Granger was a night owl, this worked out well. In one of their first meetings, Granger outlined the different areas that they would need to cover. She would focus on the essay, whilst he volunteered to be in charge of the visual aids. The project needed diagrams, and as he was a dab hand at drawing, he had a wonderful idea. It had come to him a week before, when Granger had been lamenting the fact that the textbook diagrams of the creatures did not offer useful details. Wouldn't it be helpful to have an opportunity to get a real photograph of an incubus? I wonder if a witch or wizard has ever thought to try and use a Muggle camera to try and capture an image of one. Draco smirked lazily at her. Granger, simply say the word, and I'm certain we can get one. What, a Muggle camera? She asked, distracted as she proofed their essay for at least the third time. No, Granger, an incubus. But yes, also a Muggle camera. I could take pictures of you. Of him. And you, as he visits you in your dreams, of course. There was that telltale pink blush that Draco rather adored. He could not help but stare wickedly at her, wondering what images were flitting through her brain at the moment. Now that he thought of it, he had very little trouble coming up with a fair few images of his own. Granger frowned, flustered. Don't start in about this again, Malfoy. I'm not the subject of this research project. Of course not, Granger, he simpered. But she had given him an idea. Later that day, he went to the only source he could think of for such Muggle technology. It was a fellow wizard that Draco had sought out very early in the school year. They had never really interacted before, but Draco felt that he owed the man an apology, all the same. Whilst Draco was not directly responsible for his sorrow, he did hate that the younger wizard had experienced what he had. Dennis Creevey had grown into a tall, willowy young man with chestnut-brown hair and slightly haunted blue eyes. Now a sixth year and a prefect in Gryffindor, Dennis had been easy to find with his fellow lions in the Hogwarts courtyard between classes the following day. Creevey. Hi. May I have a word?" Draco asked, hesitantly. "Something I can help you with, Malfoy?" the younger wizard asked in a neutral, guarded voice. Draco's sympathy for him had been appreciated, and Dennis had thanked him for the heartfelt words of apology, but the two wizards had not spoken since the beginning of the school year in September. Draco went on, rushing headlong into his request. The more he thought about it, the more he was already beginning to regret this. "I just wanted to ask you a question about Muggle things, if I can." Dennis's brow wrinkled. Clearly, this was one of the last things he expected Draco to ask about. Sure, I suppose." They did not have long until the next class began. Already a number of students were heading back inside. Draco decided to jump right in. "Your brother was an expert in Muggle photography, right?" Dennis gave a small smile. Yeah, sure. Colin enjoyed taking pictures. Why?" Gods, this is embarrassing." Draco began, rubbing the back of his neck and finding himself unable to meet the other wizard's eyes. "There's someone I fancy. A Muggle. I wish to give them a photograph." Dennis narrowed his eyes. "You wish to give a wizarding photograph to a Muggle?" No. A Muggle photograph. I need for it to be still." Draco was a decent artist, but he could not draw from a photograph in motion. "Okay," Dennis said slowly. "Well, I can loan you a camera if you'd like, and show you how to... couldn't you just take the photograph for me?" Draco asked in a nervous rush. "I wouldn't have the first clue as to how to operate something like that, and I'd like to get it right." "Why can't I just show you how to do it, and you can..." Dennis said, but Draco interrupted him, looking around the courtyard to be quite sure that they weren't able to be overheard. "I want the photograph to be of me," he said, in possibly the most awkward confession he'd ever made. His eyes bounced between the stones of the castle wall behind the Gryffindor, to the tufts of grass that grew between the cobbles underfoot, to the birds that fluttered overhead, anywhere but at Dennis. "Oh," Dennis said, still confused. Then realization apparently hit. Wait, do you mean..." Draco's bright red face was answer enough. "Oh. Oh God, Malfoy." Dennis seemed torn between shock and discomfort. "Nothing salacious. Just your typical..." He gestured vaguely to his torso before continuing. "Please, Creevy, I would really appreciate your help." "Godric's ass. Fine, I'll help," Dennis replied miserably. "Mate, thank you. Thank you. And if you don't mind, keep this between us, all right?" "Who the hell do you think I would want to tell about this?" Dennis asked incredulously, shaking his head. "When can we meet? I'd like to do it as soon as possible," Draco asked eagerly. Dennis sighed, clearly already regretting this. "Tell you what, I have tonight free. Room of requirement. Come round 8 and ask the room for a photography studio. Do you know how to work the room of requirement?" Draco sighed deeply. "I'm familiar. Yes." Draco entered the room of requirement at a couple of minutes after 8 o'clock, to find Dennis Creevy already setting up. The young wizard was shaking his head in disbelief. "This room really is amazing, you know. I asked it for a photography studio, and this is what it came up with. This is nicer than any photography studio I've ever seen. A dark room, all kinds of backgrounds, every camera accessory you can imagine, and these lights on the Muggle economy would run in the hundreds, I think." "Brilliant," Draco said nervously. "All right, where should I be?" Dennis took a deep breath without looking at him and said, "Over there, in front of the backdrop. I chose that one because it looks like the interior of a house. More natural that way." Draco nodded and strode to what he assumed to be the backdrop. It was a tall, flat image, and it looked like a painting whose subject had left for a bit. Right, so do I just stand here? Dennis shook his head with a chuckle. Malfoy, this is your photo shoot. You tell me what you want to do. I don't know, mate. I want to look good. Attractive. Another nervous chuckle from Dennis, who still had not properly looked at him. The Gryffindor continued to fiddle with the little black camera device. Whatever you decide should be fine, Malfoy. Draco swiftly unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his Oxford shirt beneath his jumper, and whipped both of them over his head. This finally got Dennis's attention, and the boy just stood there, staring, slack-jawed a moment. What? Not good enough? Draco asked, a hint of self-doubt creeping in. He had taken to working out with weights in their 4th year, after seeing the effects that wizards like Crumb and Diggory had had on witches. It had taken another couple of years or so to see real results, and his routine had had many ups and downs in that time. But he did find the mindlessness of lifting weights to be oddly calming, so it was one of the few activities that he'd tried to maintain, even through the worst of times. Now that his diet had normalized, and his stress levels had generally gone down, at least from what they had been, he was finally able to see a difference from where he'd started years before quite easily. No, Dennis choked out. It's fine. You're fine. The wizard, who had started to go pink, was now flushed nearly red. You're right, mate. Draco moved a step closer to him, brow furrowed in concern. I'm good, Dennis said quickly. Let's just get this done, all right? Yeah, sure, Draco said. He turned back to look at the backdrop. I wish I had a place to sit. A low, backless stool appeared in front of him, courtesy of the ever-providing room. Ah, perfect. He sat, facing the wizard, who began moving towards him reluctantly. Right, so just, Dennis said, bringing up the camera to his face and clicking the shutter. Draco sat up straighter, turning to his side. Good, that's good. Now, move around a bit, Dennis instructed. Click, click, click. Here? Draco asked, raising his arms to put his hands behind his head. Yep. Click, click, click. Okay, now, lean a little bit towards me. Draco leaned forward, one knee coming up to prop his elbows on. Dennis considered the pose, then shook his head. No, not that far. Drop your knee. Now, hold your chest up and lean in. With a few more clicks, Dennis dropped the camera slowly and bit his lip. Okay, I've got a dozen or so. One of those should be good. Thanks, mate. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, Draco answered, grabbing up his shirt and jumper and tugging both of them back over his head. Dennis closed his eyes a moment longer than necessary, then nodded. It was no problem, he replied in a tight voice. Sudden understanding flooded Draco's mind. Creevy, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but... Dennis gave a short laugh. But I have a feeling you're about to. Draco smiled, slightly. Perhaps. Are you... do you... Dennis swallowed hard, then said in a gruff voice, If you're about to ask me if I prefer wizards instead of witches, then the answer is yes. I apologize if that upsets you. If you want to destroy this film before we develop it, I understand completely. But rest assured, I can and will defend myself. Draco shook his head. No, that's not... listen, Creevy, one of my best mates here was that way. It's not anything to be embarrassed or fussed about. Blaise Zabini had been the same way, Draco knew, and it had never bothered Draco to know this about him. Easy for you to say, Dennis replied, with a short bark of laughter, still not meeting Draco's eye. You know, I really owe you for this, Creevy, setting this up, taking these photographs, keeping this quiet. Maybe one of these days I can set you up with my friend. The two of you can see where it goes." Dennis shook his head, his laughter obvious now. "You realize that's not how it works with us, right, Malfoy? Just because we're both into wizards doesn't mean we're going to be into each other." He gave the wizard a half-smile. "I guess you're right. Come on, let's get these developed. I have a quiz in charms class in the morning." When the photographs were properly developed and hung on a line to dry, Draco could immediately tell which one he wanted to use. It was the last one, the one in which he'd been leaning forward just as Dennis lowered the camera. The photograph had missed his face, or at least his eyes. It was actually perfect. If he showed Granger a photograph of himself, she would probably scoff and toss it back in his face. But this could be anyone. "Cheers. Thanks so much, mate," Draco said, picking up his wand and conjuring a folder in which to place the photograph. "What should I do with these?" Dennis asked, his eyes not leaving the other photos. "Destroy them? Vanish them? Doesn't matter to me," Draco replied, checking his shirt collar to make sure that it was perfect once more. Dennis smiled wryly. "How about I save these for Hermione? You never know, she might like the whole set." Draco froze, his hand going still as if to grope for his collar point, stuck inside of his jumper. After a moment he said, "Don't say anything to her about this. Please." Dennis laughed. "I knew it. Fine, I won't say anything. To be honest, I really didn't think you even had it in you. Do you honestly like her, like you said?" Draco breathed out heavily. "Yes, I do." Dennis shook his head, both amused and bewildered. "All right, but Malfoy, if you're going to do this, you'd better be doing it for the right reasons. She's not just a notch in someone's headboard. You may not know it, being in Slytherin and all, but she's special to a lot of people." Draco nodded curtly. "Believe me, I understand. She could never be just a notch anywhere, on anything. And perhaps this is just me being selfish, but I want her. She's special to me as well." "Does she know that?" Dennis asked, surprised. "Fuck no, mate. You think she'd give me any sort of chance, even if she did know?" Draco asked, both in rebuke of the other man's words, and also as a legitimate question. Would she? Dennis simply shook his head. "I don't even know any more, mate. But if there's one thing I've learned in the last year or so, it's that anything is possible, and we can't take anything for granted." Draco nodded his unspoken thanks at the other wizard, then moved towards the door. Just before he reached it, he turned back, curious. "Creevy, do you have any idea what a lank is?" Now, Dennis looked more confuzzled than ever. "Nothing, as far as I'm aware." "Great. Cheers, then," Draco muttered. He entered the common room quietly, as it was now past 10 o'clock. Granger sat on the sofa, eating a bowl of grapes and reading The Catcher in the Rye, the very book that only a few months before she had admonished him for reading whilst eating. He smirked. "Eating and reading at the same time, then, Granger. That's a capital offence, you know." She smirked back. "It's my book, Malfoy. I shall do with it as I wish." He narrowed his eyes at her, playfully. "Still hoping to convince me that your book is worth my time, Granger?" She raised one eyebrow at him. "I know you read this whole book, Malfoy." "How dare you accuse me of partaking in such drivel, witch?" he replied hotly, but with a grin. He snatched up a grape from her bowl, tossing it in the air and catching it in his mouth. She shook her head, suppressing a smile. "I'm surrounded by phonies." He laughed. How would you even know you weren't being a phony? The trouble is, you wouldn't." She narrowed her eyes at him and shook her head in amusement. Then she rubbed tiredly at her eyes and yawned. "Damn this blasted candlelight nonsense! I will never understand why we cannot figure out a way to have Muggle lights in here. What I wouldn't give for a couple of lamps." Draco had been reaching for another grape, but now he stood stock still, nearly dropping the folder in his hand. The memory of that list, of his Granger plan, all came flooding back to him. As he had been writing it, he had pictured her just like this, trying to read by candlelight or wand light, and straining her eyes. Only in his half-asleep daze, he'd written lank instead of lamp. He snagged one more grape and took a deep, excited breath, not even trying to hide the smirk on his face that Granger likely couldn't see in the dim light anyway. He would ask Pym to start working on it immediately. By tomorrow at this time, it would all be finished. She would appreciate the gesture. She might even appreciate him. And this time, he thought, his mind's eye flashing upon the condor feather quill that lay innocuously there on the coffee table, he would take credit for it. The next day, Draco skipped classes, claiming a stomachache. As soon as Theo and Granger left for Transfiguration's class, he called Pym. The elf arrived clutching 2 tall Muggle lamps, one in each hand, with a third, shorter lamp balanced precariously atop his bald head. "Merlin, Pym, you could have made 2 trips," Draco laughed. They set to work immediately, holding up different parts of the lamps, unscrewing and then rescrewing bits and bobs all over them, prodding different places with his wand. At one point, when touching his wand to the part where 3 tiny sticks of metal protruded from a long length of some sort of rope, the lamp lit up just like he'd seen in Muggle London. It shone very brightly for a couple of seconds before there was a loud pop and a spark. "Right," Draco said, eyes wide in shock. "Brilliant. Pym, go find us another one." The elf popped away, and Draco vanished the lamp quickly, as it was beginning to smell like a Dr. Filibuster's firework. Pym reappeared with a new lamp. Draco tried touching his wand to the metal bits again, but with less gusto. This time the lamp lit, but the light went out as soon as his wand left the 3 metal bits. Clearly the rope and pins did something important to make the light. He only needed to figure out a way to infuse the space around them with his magic. 2 hours later, with creative applications of the stasis, bubblehead, and sticking charms, he had it. Now, no matter where the lamps were placed, they would stay lit unless one pulled the little metal chain near the top. Draco was incredibly proud of himself, and could hardly wait to show her. But it was Theo who arrived first back from class. "What are these?" he asked disdainfully. "They're called lamps," Draco said shortly, his eyes trained upon the door back into the corridor, waiting for her. "And what exactly do they do?" the other wizard asked with barely disguised scorn. "Granger says it's too dim to read in here," he said. Theo raised a brow. "She can't just light her wand." Draco sighed. "I suppose not, Theo. Regardless, she said she wanted lamps." "And so you figured out a way to get them for her?" Theo laughed, giving him a knowing look. "Well played, mate." The door to the dormitory opened once again, and Granger stepped inside. She stopped short, looking surprised. "Oh, was this then?" she asked. "Lamps!" Theo proclaimed proudly. "Thought you might like these when you're reading." Granger's face looked beyond ecstatic. "Oh my goodness! These are wonderful, Theo, but how?" And she set to work inspecting them, whilst Draco pictured himself punching the other wizard in the face. Suffice to say, Theo should be very glad that Draco had sworn off the dark arts, a personal stance that he was currently reconsidering. "Thank you both so very much," Granger said almost tearfully. "I can't tell you how much this means to me." "So glad you like them," Theo simpered, skipping off for his room. The two of them were alone now. Draco turned to go to his own room, but Granger's voice stopped him. "How did you make them work, then?" The witch turned to look at him, raising one eyebrow with a knowing smile. He offered her a relieved grin. "Shouldn't you be asking Theo?" "Malfoy, Theo is... well, he's Theo. He's sweet, but this was not his doing, I feel sure." His heart leapt at her words. He couldn't help his embarrassed smile as he explained the multiple steps of magic involved. Granger looked at him as though she did not know what to think. "This is really amazing, you know. I tried to do something similar years ago and finally gave up. Thank you, Malfoy. This really is special." "It's Draco," he said. She smiled, and for a moment looked as though she might come towards him and... what? Embrace him? Kiss his cheek? But she did none of those things. Instead, she only placed one small hand on his forearm, on top of his jumper. Underneath, his dark mark lay dormant and faded. He knew it wasn't the old brand that caused the intense spark, zinging up his arm and into his core. She squeezed his arm lightly, smiling as she walked past him into her room. When she emerged from it a short while later to read, the light in her eyes rivaled even that of the lamp under which she read. The end of May, 1999. Draco's tenuous, was it friendship? Yes, he would call her a friend, and he felt as though the feeling was mutual. His tenuous friendship with Granger was still such a riddle. Yes, whilst it was true that he and Granger were getting along swimmingly, for the most part, their incubus project was shaping up nicely, in spite of her resistance to his suggestion of trapping one for study. They had more than a few shared moments of jest and even what could be easily described as friendship over the past school year. And there had been those late minutes during and after New Year's Eve in which he thought perhaps they were bordering on something more than friendship. But Weasley had still come to visit that spring, even after those achingly few moments of connection that he and the witch had experienced. Truth be told, he really was no closer to entering her chamber of secrets, as Theo had so crassly put it. And time was ticking away. In a matter of a few weeks they would be parting company for the summer, and would not see each other again until October at Oxford. There still had not been word on their living quarters, though Draco wasn't overly concerned about it. He knew between his familial ties to the university and the minister's interference, he would likely be in the same college or possibly even in the same residence hall as Granger. But in the meantime he still had a few weeks here that were blessedly Weasley free. He decided to make the most of it on a night in which she'd agreed to focus on the incubus project. With the help of his elf, he set the perfect mood. Chocolate-covered strawberries, low mood lighting, a roaring fire in the fireplace. He had managed to get Theo and his current girlfriend, a seventh year named Emily Whittaker, assigned detention together. Draco had no doubt that there was only one thing getting polished in the trophy room tonight, and it wasn't a trophy. At first his plan seemed to be working. Granger would make a joke, and he would laugh. He would make a snarky comment, and she would narrow her eyes at him playfully across the expanse of books between them on the sofa. Any time he had an excuse to move closer to her, he would, until their knees nearly touched. Then Draco withdrew the drawing he'd made of the incubus. He had used the various textbooks' illustrations for the face and horns, but the body was entirely based upon his own, and he had to admit it had come out rather nicely. When Granger admitted that most women didn't want overly muscled men, his heart sang. She said, "The incubus isn't meant to be a muscle-bound caveman, throwing women over his shoulder and having his tawdry way with them. He's meant to seduce them, to make them want to be there." The image popped into his mind of Granger falling into her bed as she had that New Year's night, curls spread with abandon as she looked up at him. He's meant to seduce them, to make them want him to be there. She was discussing the incubus, but he saw her breaths coming quick and deep, her cheeks warm as her eyes roamed the room. He took a shallow breath and looked up from his drawing, his eyes taking their time to pass across her body, slowly. Was it a seduction Granger wanted? Did she even realize that that's what this was? What did this witch want that he wasn't giving her? And how does he do that exactly? He asked, raising one eyebrow at her. He could see the blush creeping up her neck, and he smiled inwardly in victory. Perhaps it was working. Finally she answered, "I don't know, just the usual way." Draco licked his lips carefully before speaking in a low voice, barely above a whisper. "Granger, has no one ever seduced you before?" Granger scoffed. "Sod off, Malfoy. I've told you before, this project isn't about me. Can you just focus on the task at hand for once? And what in the name of Merlin even are these study snacks? I've gotten strawberry pulp and chocolate smears all over my rough draft of the essay." She began clearing the chocolate and fruit juice stains from her parchment. Draco only looked down at the drawing, wondering if he'd come on to her too strongly. Salazar's ass, he thought. This had not gone well at all. "Apologies, Granger. I'll do better next time," he promised, and he meant it. The next time he tried to woo this witch, really woo her, he wasn't going to disguise it as research projects, or discussions about books, or the best way to eat apples, or anything else. He would do better. Unfortunately for him, the next time he tried, he would, in fact, not do better. Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great 78. If you enjoyed the story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great 78 on Archive of Our Own.